Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this beautiful Monday afternoon, and the NBA regular season is over. So now we are going to transition into where basketball really hits its peak. Well, NBA basketball, I should say, because basketball already hit its peak with the NCAA and March Madness and the women's and men's tournament. But this is the highest point of NBA viewership. Usually, most of the popular games are the playoff games. So with that in mind, we are going to be breaking up the first segment into two parts, so it'll be 1 and 2 segments. So the first is going to be about the Western Conference matchups and all the potential storylines for that and what to expect, what teams I think are going to make it out, this, that, and the other. And then the second segment, we're going to do the exact same thing, but with the Eastern Conference, which might be a little bit more interesting, but again, both conferences are really, really close. So, and then we're going to do a recap of all the NBA games that went down yesterday, as well as an overall recap of the season as a whole, my thoughts on this season, if it was what I expected, this, that, and the other. We're just going to go into that. And we also have a fourth segment that I like to reveal at the end of every single third segment, so stay in tune for that. Watch all the way up until the third segment to figure out exactly what that is. And before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead and use the link in the description to get your comments recognized. The link is also displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And with that taken care of, we can go right ahead and dive into the playoffs and the matchups that are going to happen in specifically the Western Conference for now. And if you want to watch the Eastern Conference, go ahead and wait for part 2. For those of you who watch the YouTube videos, and for those of you who are on the live stream, just wait a little bit until I get past the Western Conference, because there's a lot to be discussed about this Western Conference because of how competitive it's been throughout the regular season. And I expect that competitiveness to go forth in the playoffs. I'm just adjusting my battery just so my phone doesn't die on me, because that would be really, really bad. And looking at the standings, because if you pay attention to this podcast, you'll notice that every single time I say something completely different about the standings because of how often they flip-flop with the gap being as close as it is, especially in the Western Conference. So your final standings for the Western Conference are OKC at 1, Denver Nuggets at 2, the Timberwolves at 3, the Clippers at 4, the Mavericks at 5, the Phoenix Suns at 6, and the teams that are in the play-in are the 7th seeded New Orleans New Orleans Pelicans, the Los Angeles Lakers at the 8th seed, the Kings at the 9th seed, and the Warriors in the 10th seed. So just because I feel like a lot of people are going to want to know more about this now as opposed to later, we might as well go ahead and talk about the play-in and the potential scenarios that could go on, because whoever wins in the play-in, depending on when they win, is going to face either Denver or Oklahoma City. So there was actually a lot of debate on if the Lakers should lose this play-in game, the first play-in game, on purpose. Because if you remember from my previous podcast and some episodes that I've done there, I said that the best likely scenario for the Lakers is if they win out and they make either the 8th or 7th seed, so that way they can choose on whether or not they can either play Denver in that first round, or they could play OKC or the Timberwolves in that first round, depending on how the seedings go. Well, now that the seedings have already finished, it's safe to say that they might not even want to win the first game now, because the Denver Nuggets are the 2nd seed, And the second seed is going to play the winner between the 8th and 7th seed, so between the Lakers and the Pelicans. And if the Lakers win that game, then they're going to be playing the team that swept them the previous year, which I'm not entirely sure is a matchup that they are very thrilled about playing again. So there's a possibility that they might just lose the first game intentionally, rest LeBron, rest Anthony Davis, and then in the next game, when they match up between either the Kings or Golden State, they win that game, which in turn allows them to play OKC, which is a much better team in terms of matchups for them. Like, it's a better team for them to go up against in terms of matchups, given how the Thunder are inexperienced. The Thunder are the youngest number 1 seed ever in NBA history. And given their inexperience and the fact that the Lakers have previously won multiple games against them, I feel like that would be a better matchup that they would want to exploit. Now, obviously, this comes at the risk of losing in a one-and-done game, but LeBron James, like, that's all I really got to say. I feel like that is probably the most LeBron thing to do, is to intentionally lose just to get the matchups right, and then turn it on and start winning in the playoffs. That sounds like a LeBron story to me. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a LeBron story to me. Now, for the Kings and the Warriors matchup, the Kings, they've lost to the Warriors in a 7-game series. However, that was just a 7-game series, and anything can happen in just one game. I feel like the Kings, they do have a good chance of actually beating the Golden State Warriors this time, given how inconsistent the Warriors have been with both Steph and Klay Thompson. However, again, the Warriors, they are just naturally really good against the Kings. So that's a little bit up in the air. And if the Lakers match up against Golden State, I feel like they're going to win. But if they match up against the Kings, the answer is not quite clear, which then begs the question, should they even bother trying to lose that first game in the first place? But that's just food for thought. So looking at like the matchups for this playoffs, we might as well talk about like the definite matchups that are happening. So it'll be the Clippers going up against the Mavericks. That is already set in stone. That is definitely going to happen. And, I mean, this is going to be the third time in the last 4 years or 5 years or so, that the Clippers matched up against the Dallas Mavericks. Like, Luka Doncic, he always plays well against the Clippers, but his team ends up losing in the end. And in the most recent playoff series that they had, they did an anomaly where it was the Mavericks were winning in LA, but then LA was winning in Dallas, and it was the first time in NBA history that not a single team has won a home playoff game after 6 games. Like, at least one team was expected to win one home game, and neither of them did, up until the very end, where the Clippers ended up closing them out in Game 7. And the problem with Luka is, well, it's not really a problem with Luka, it's a problem with Luka's team, is that they're just not good enough to, like, be able to match the scoring as the Clippers are. Like, the Clippers, when they've had Kawhi and when they've had Paul George, they usually always have a deep bench, and they've had a deep bench that allows their team to sort of stay afloat long enough before they end up if they end up losing, but they usually prevail in the end because of the better team that they have. Now, with Kyrie Irving added to the roster, the story might be a little bit different. This might be the first time that the Mavericks actually beat the Clippers in the playoffs, and Luka finally gets over that hump of constantly losing to the Clippers in the first round. Because that's basically been the one thing that's been preventing Luka from making deep playoff runs, the Clippers. And if you look at the last few seasons where he hasn't matched up against the Clippers, well, the most recent one, the Mavs didn't make the playoffs because the team just wasn't deep enough. And in the last matchups, when they did not have to see the Clippers in the first round, they eventually made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals. where they ultimately ended up losing, but still, it's a very deep run nonetheless. And obviously, it's like, for some reason, the Clippers are just a bugaboo for Luka Doncic. And we'll see how this matchup goes in the postseason. The Timberwolves, they play against the Suns. Karl-Anthony Towns is also expected to make his return coming, at least around towards this weekend. But regardless, he still has enough time to, he has until, April 20th or so before they play their first game to decide on, well, not really decide, but to see if he's able to play in the playoffs and ultimately help the Timberwolves make that happen. However, Bradley Beal on recently, well, I don't know where he said this on, but it is a quote that he said. He said that it was winning time, and he has his eyes set on that ring, and that's going to be the matchup that the Timberwolves have to play in the first round. So, in terms of Devin Booker, now in terms of matchups, I think Anthony Edwards is going to be able to score as much, and if not even guard Devin Booker in the isolation. Anthony Edwards is a pretty good defender, given how good he is offensively, and I feel like their scoring output is going to cancel out. It's really going to be determined on whether or not Karl-Anthony Towns can play, and whether or not he can bring that same scoring production that he usually always does, and if the rest of the Timberwolves bench is able to fight back and outscore the rest of the Phoenix Suns bench, who have a very competent bench, and they also have a very competent starting lineup with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Grayson Allen, who just received a 4-year, $70 million contract from the Phoenix Suns, and as well as Kevin Durant and Nurkic. Now, this roster is very dangerous because all of these players, especially the players coming off the bench with Eric Gordon, Bol, all of them, they are all very good at scoring the ball. So defense is going to be the key for the Timberwolves, even though, but that's going to be their strong suit because they are the number one ranked team defensively. So I feel like they have just the right matchups that they need in order to win and make it and advanced farther into the playoffs and go to the second round, as opposed to losing to Phoenix, whereas Phoenix only has offense. Their ceiling is just how good their offense can perform with KD, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. And they usually are inconsistent in the playoffs, especially when the game sort of becomes a lot slower and much more heavily minded on how to stop them in the half court. And I feel like the best chances are going to be the Timberwolves, simply because Kevin Durant, he's struggled recently in the playoffs. Devin Booker has also struggled recently in the playoffs, and Bradley Beal has never had to deal with this kind of pressure in the playoffs because he was in a much weaker Eastern Conference when he has made the playoffs. And regardless, it wasn't like he made it that far without the help of John Wall. But regardless, I still think these are going to be good matchups that are going to come in, and I have the Timberwolves winning in 6, the Clippers winning in 7, and I can't really give you my opinions on whether or on the 1 and the 2 seed on whether they're going to make it out, because again, it's all dependent on matchups. So I think between the 1 and the 2 seed in the Western Conference, I think OKC, while they are the best team in the West right now, they have the most chances they have the highest chances of losing in the first round due to their inexperience. But again, it's dependent on matchups. If they match up against the Pelicans, I think I think OKC will lose. If they match up against the Lakers, I also think OKC is going to lose. If they match up against the Kings, I think that's probably the best option that they have in terms of matchups, because Shai can outduel De'Aaron Fox, and Chet should be able to outduel Sabonis, and the rest of the Thunder squad is going to be able to. It's going to be a very, very close matchup. So for the Kings, if they match up against the Kings, I actually have that going to 7 games if they match up against the Kings. However, if they match up against the Lakers, I have the Lakers winning in 6. And then if they match up against the Pelicans, I have the Pelicans winning in 6 as well. Now, if they match up against Golden State, I'm not entirely sure of how that matchup is going to play. I'm not even going to lie to you. Of all the matchups that I'm most uncertain about, it's going to be OKC against the Golden State Warriors, because I really want to say that the Warriors will sweep them. But not the Warriors. I really want to say that OKC is going to sweep the Warriors, but due to their inexperience, I am not entirely sure exactly I'm not entirely sure exactly what the matchups are going to hold, because again, very, very close. Now, for the Nuggets, they have a choice. Well, they don't really have a choice. They're going to be going up against either the Pelicans or the Lakers. If they go up against the Lakers, I have them winning in at most 5. Given how the Lakers, they played them last year, and they did not play that well last year. And Jokic was just making ridiculous shots over Anthony Davis and over everybody when the shot clock expires, despite the Lakers playing great defense. So now if they match up against the Pelicans, I feel like the Pelicans can make the series a little bit more competitive because of the matchups that they have. Then again, it's it could go I could see the Nuggets sweeping them as well. So very complicated with the matchups. It's very, very difficult to tell which team has the upper hand, and I really can't give you that answer right now. So our best bet is to just wait and see. I really think this is going to be a very, very competitive first round in the Western Conference. But with that, we are out of time for the first segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the second segment, where I talk about the Eastern Conference and answer the comments that are coming in right now, just right after this break in the first segment. And again, I'm just going to be doing the same thing that I did in this last segment, just with the Eastern Conference. So I will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about the Eastern Conference and the playoff matchups that are going to be going on there. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead and use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment to get your comments recognized. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show. Makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and dive into the second segment where I talk about the Eastern Conference. Actually, before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the chat just for a second. Corrido, once again, hey, what's up, Corrido? In the chat, he's asking my opinions on Steph Curry's ankle injuries and saying that Curry should go to surgery or force him to wear high tops. And it's the same ankle that he rolled on the Bulls game. So Curry has always had ankle injuries. That's been the one thing that's plagued his career. It's every so now and then he'll just go down with an ankle injury and it'll sideline him for a few games. So I don't really think there's much that can be done to change it. Even if he does wear high tops, I really don't think that's going to affect much because he also wears ankle braces to make sure that his ankle doesn't do that. Yet, he always succumbs to those injuries. So I really don't think that it's going to necessarily plague him. He's one of those players where it's when you have a great player like him and he is an all-time great, it's most of the time they're usually able to turn it on and off, and even despite their injuries, there's numerous players who have played through injuries and have still played rather well. Then again, there's also a few players who haven't played well through injuries. But the fact that it's mainly his ankle, and that's not going to affect his shooting, in my opinion, because of how the offense is set up. The offense is set up so that way there are numerous screens he can run around, and he'll be able to get his shot off just about any day of the week. So I don't really think that's going to affect him much in this play-in tournament. However, anything can happen. But regardless, let's go right ahead into the Eastern Conference and talk about the seedings, which are finally determined, because, they flip-flop every now and then. So the number one seed is obviously the Boston Celtics. They've held the one seed throughout the entirety of the regular season, and they have the most wins in the Eastern Conference. So makes sense how they hold that one seed, and they have it locked down. The Knicks actually surprised me with being able to take the second seed. Now, this is the first time that the Knicks have been able to get that high in the seedings since 2013 and 2014 with Carmelo Anthony. So, very, very surprising season coming in from the Knicks. I've said previously that if there was any team that could beat Boston, it will be the Knicks. And so far, being the second team in the Eastern Conference, I've been proved they do have the best odds. But regardless, the third seed is the Milwaukee Bucks. They ended up dropping a couple of games, which ended up moving them down from the second seed all the way down to the third seed. And the Cavs are the fourth seed. The Orlando Magic are the fifth seed. And the Pacers were able to secure their playoff spot as the sixth seed. So the play-in tournament is going to be consistent of the 76ers and the Miami Heat competing to play against the New York Knicks. And then the next round of the play-in is the Chicago Bulls going up against Atlanta, seeing who could compete for the 8th seed and who would win in that matchup right there. So, obviously, the winner of the 9th and the 10th is going to have to play the loser of between the 7th and the 8th. But I really think we can sort of disqualify the 9 and 10th seed because, quite frankly, with the Sixers and the Miami Heat being in the play-in, I really don't think that that the Bulls or the Atlanta Hawks have anything to be able to stop either of those teams. The gap between the 9th seed and the 8th seed is 5 games. So with that in mind, I just think that the 7th and 8th seed are just by far that much better than the 9 and 10 seed. So I'm not really going to talk much about that play-in tournament, like that matchup specifically, because I just don't see that. I just don't see either of those teams making the playoffs. It's going to be between the Sixers and the Miami Heat. Now, depending on who wins the first game is really like that's the real anticipation, because whoever wins the first matchup goes up against the Knicks. And I feel like the Sixers or the Miami Heat, they have a really good chance of beating the Knicks, even though, like, you know, as a relative close to New York, I don't see either of those teams beating the Knicks, but it could happen. The Miami Heat, they're notorious for making ridiculous playoff runs regardless of what seed they are. So anything can happen in these playoffs, and I really wouldn't put it past either of these teams to be able to beat the Knicks. Now, if one of those teams loses, so if Miami ends up losing, then they might have to play against the Boston Celtics in the first round, which will be a repeat of the Eastern Conference Finals matchup where Miami almost blew a 3-0 lead, but they ended up beating the Boston Celtics while the Celtics were at home in a blowout win. So there might be a lot of revenge fueled into that matchup in the first round, which will allow the Celtics to be able to win. And I really don't think that Miami has a chance of making it deep unless they win the first round of the play-in. Unless they win the first play-in game. I don't think they're going to have what it takes to beat Boston this year. And as for the Sixers never are able to beat Boston. So I don't see that changing whatsoever, even though they just got Embiid back and, like, you know, their team is much, much better with Joel Embiid. I genuinely do not see that happening. So I think the Sixers' playoff hopes, they're basically it. Like, they have to win the play-in, and then they're just going to lose in the first round. That's my prediction for the Sixers, simply because it's just like they do this every single time, and it's most likely not going to change. So the most anticipated matchup of the Eastern Conference is going to be the Bucks going up against the Pacers. So this has potential to be very, very exciting, because if you guys remember, earlier in the regular season, Giannis and a couple of Indiana staff members, they got into a little bit of debate and a little bit of a heated exchange because Giannis wanted the game ball, but they weren't giving Giannis the game ball. And all the drama just started flooding in, yada, yada, yada. And obviously there's a lot of bad blood between these two teams. And it's going to be very, very close. Like, I think this series is going to go to 7 games, and it's going to come down to the very final seconds on who is winning this series. Because, quite frankly, the Milwaukee Bucks, they have not been nearly the dominant team that I thought they were going to be since getting Doc Rivers. And the Pacers, they are 4-1 in the regular season when going up against the Milwaukee Bucks. So they have a lot of experience beating the Bucks in this matchup, as opposed to Bucks, who are kind of struggling right now. So I could definitely see the Pacers beating the Bucks in this series, which is why I think this series is going to go to 7 games, because I could also see the Milwaukee Bucks just turning it on, figuring it out with Dame and Giannis, and being able to, because in the playoffs, the offense starts shifting to a half-court set. So the pacing is going to be a little bit slower, and I'm not entirely sure if the Pacers' high-powered offense is going to be just as high-powered as it was in the regular season, where teams were very lazy getting back on defense, and which allowed the Pacers to get open threes. In a playoff matchup, it's very, very different. So depending on how Doc Rivers coaches, and depending on how good or bad the offense is for the Pacers, it could make or break either of their seasons, and I have this going to 7 games. So I have no idea which of the teams are going to end up coming out on top, just because of like how all of the things that I just brought up. Now, the Cavs, they match up against the Orlando Magic. So this is arguably the best matchup that the Cavs could really ask for when talking about like playoffs and the matchups, because I said previously like they did not want to match up against the Knicks. That would be really, really bad considering how they lost to the Knicks in the first round the previous year, and the Knicks only got better since then. So this matchup against a really inexperienced Orlando Magic team is probably the best move for them. So I see the Cavs winning in 5 games. Usually Orlando, like, they steal, like, one game, like, no matter what opponent they go up against. So I have the Cavs winning in 5. I don't really see the Orlando Magic making it out, even though it is a possibility. But Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs is just another animal. So I really don't see them losing that series. So it's really going to come down to the Bucks and the Pacers, because that, I think, is just by far the best matchup in the entirety of the Eastern Conference. Now, Miami against the Knicks, that would be a very good matchup. I think that since, Miami was able to beat the New York Knicks last year because, some of the players were injured and it was just Jalen Brunson doing the most he could going up against the Miami Heat, I think there's also going to be some revenge fueled into the Knicks and trying to win in that series. I feel like they're going to take that series much more personally than they would any other series. And so I have that series, if that does end up happening, going to 6 games or even 7 games in favor of the Knicks. So that's another matchup that I'm really looking forward to in these playoffs. I genuinely do not expect the Atlanta Hawks to make any kind of noise, and I don't expect the Chicago Bulls to make any kind of noise either. But that's just me. So, and again, whichever of those teams ends up making it out and goes up against the Boston Celtics, I think the Celtics are just going to make it out anyway. So those are my thoughts on the playoffs and the overall playoff picture. So with that, we are out of time for this second segment and part 2 of the playoff review, I guess you could say. That rhymed, Dr. Seuss. But regardless, we're going to go into the third segment where I give a quick recap of all of the NBA games that went down last night, and as well as a recap of the season as a whole. Maybe talk about like some of who I think is going to win some really important awards, things of that nature. So I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be we're going to give a quick recap of all the NBA games that went down previously. Now, I just sort of moved the title just a little bit just because, my OCD was kicking in. But regardless, let's go right ahead and get into the matchups that happened last night and just give the overall stats, basically. Do what I usually do on this in this segment. So the Lakers, they ended up beating the Pelicans, which ended up putting them in the position that they're in right now, where now they have to basically play the Pelicans again in the play-in just to go up against the Denver Nuggets in the first round of the playoffs, depending on who wins. So in this game, D'Angelo Russell ended the game with 19 points. LeBron James ended with a triple-double, 28 points, 11 rebounds, and 17 assists. He recently passed the 11,000 assist marker, making him the only NBA player in NBA history to have 40K points and 11K assists, along with 11K rebounds. Like, again, just more records and more counting stats that LeBron has added to his resume, as if he has nothing left as if he has more to prove, even though I don't think he has much left to prove. He's already the greatest basketball player ever, in my opinion. Anthony Davis ended the game with 30 points and 11 rebounds. He also had some back spasms after the game and had to leave, so that could bring up serious problems going into the playoffs, because if that back starts acting up in the playoffs after he had a phenomenal season of playing practically every single game, like, he was ridiculed previously for like not playing as many games, and people were calling him he was made out of glass, things of that nature. Now he's actually played a lot of these games, but now it would be really, really bad if in the postseason he's not healthy. That will crush every single one of the Lakers' hopes and dreams, and that is not something that I think should be taken lightly, because Anthony Davis is crucial to the Lakers and their success. And if he's injured, I really don't see the Lakers making it out. So that's basically all the important scoring on the Lakers side. Now for the Pelicans, CJ McCollum ended the game with 25 points. Zion only ended with 12. And that was basically, there's also Herbert Jones, who ended the game with 18 points. And Brandon Ingram made his return, ending the game with 13 points. Only played 23 minutes, however. So we'll have to see how well he is, how good he is, and like how able he is for the playoffs. But overall, the scoring was rather inefficient coming in from the Pelicans, and like from an individual standpoint, because as a team they shot 40% from three, which is much better than the Lakers' 37% from three, yet the Lakers were able to come out on top. So just a little bit of a play-in preview, I guess you could say, of the matchups, because they do play against each other in the play-in, and they will. So depending on how good Anthony Davis is going to like play out, determine the series. So next game on the list, the Knicks ended up beating the Chicago Bulls 119-120, and this solidified their spot as the second seed as they clinched it. Jalen Brunson ended the game with 40 points and 7 assists and 8 rebounds. DiVincenzo ended the game with 25 points, and Josh Hart ended the game with 12 points and 10 rebounds. And just looking at more, that was basically all the important scoring that came in from the Knicks. Now, I sort of see a trend that could be a problem in the playoffs, and that is the fact that Jalen Brunson has to score 40 in order to even beat the Chicago Bulls in overtime. Now, that might be really bad for the Knicks, because if Jalen Brunson is your only means of offensive production, then that would just make it a lot easier on teams to be able to stop you. So the Knicks bench, and the Knicks, they do have a really deep bench, but they're going to have to perform. They're going to have to show up. If they don't show up, then that's bad news for New York. Now, on the Bulls side, DeRozan ended the game with 30 points, so he could be a key player in the play-in matchups, depending on how that goes. Kobe White ended the game with 26. Vucevic ended the game with 29 and 11. And let's see, just looking at the bench, not really much scoring production coming in from the bench. So they played a very good game, the Chicago Bulls, going up against the Knicks. So, between the Bulls and the Hawks, I have the Bulls winning in that matchup. I didn't talk about it previously because I just felt like there was no need to talk about it. I think both of those teams, they don't have a single chance against Miami or the Sixers. So not really much that needs to be said about them, but DeRozan could be in for a very good play-in game against the Hawks. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he drops like 50 points. But regardless, let's move on to the next game on this list, which is going to be the Thunder going up against the Mavericks. So the Thunder, they ended up winning 135-86. This was a huge blowout win for the Thunder, even though the Mavericks, they did not play Luka Doncic and they did not play Kyrie Irving. So, but at the same time, they barely played any of their starters in this game. So a lot of the scoring actually came from the bench as opposed to any of the starters. Shai only ended the game with 15 points, but that was because he ended with 16 minutes. And if we look at the rest of the roster, the entire bench played above 10 minutes. So the scoring output is going to be a little different. Of course, Shai leads the entire team in scoring, but there were a lot of people that ended up getting into double digits. So Aaron Wiggins ended the game with 14 points, 5 of 8 from the field. Ousmane Deng ended the game, forgive me if I botched that name, ended the game with 13 points, 6 of 12 from the field. Chet ended with 13. Cason Wallace ended the game with 12. Lindy Walters ended the game with 12 as well. Jalen Williams ended the game with 9. Gordon Hayward ended the game with 10. And keep in mind, these players are shooting very, very efficiently. The last few players that I've mentioned, they've all shot 4 of 6 from the field. And let's see, who else on this list? And that was basically like the entirety of the scoring output for the Thunder. It was very much spread in this game. And obviously it's going to be relatively spread when you have all of your starters sitting out. And the Mavericks, they sort of took a different approach where they had everybody, well, they had everybody in the game, but it wasn't like they had everybody in increments. Like, they would play out everybody for as long as they could. So the leading scorer for the Mavericks this time was Brandon Williams with 22 points. Olivier Maxime Prosper, really long name, but ended the game with 15 points, 5 of 14 from the field. And AJ Lawson ended the game with 12 points, 5 of 13 from the field. And Alex Fudge ended the game with 11 points, 5 of 9 from the field, along with Jaden Hardy, who ended the game 4 of 14 with 9 points. And that's basically like all of the scoring that came in from the Mavericks. Again, they did not have their best players with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, so there wasn't really much offense that the Mavs were able to generate because most of the offense is generated by those two players. So not really a surprising loss coming in from the Thunder, who have been able to rebuild fantastically given how they lost Kevin Durant, and now all of a sudden they're probably one of the deepest teams with the youngest players, and they're all really good in the 1 seed. So it's like, I don't know why the Mavericks decided to not play Luka and Kyrie to sort of like, to prevent them from taking that 1 seed, because it was coming down to the final game. So I'm very surprised that they didn't really bother trying. But then again, I guess they just didn't want to worry about Kyrie or Luka Doncic getting hurt. So there's always that. Now, let's see. The Hawks, they ended up playing the Pacers, and they lost 157-115. The Pacers were scoring at a ridiculous margin. Like, they scored 30 points in every single quarter. And they scored 49 points in the first quarter. Now, if I remember the halftime score, if I can just do quick math real quick and just remember exactly what the halftime score was, I believe it was somewhere around, the halftime score was 86 to, I believe, maybe 60 something. It was a really big margin, and there was a lot of scoring. It was very, very difficult to keep track in this game. And Pascal Siakam, he ended the game with 28 points. Halliburton ended the game with 12 and 13, and Miles Turner ended the game with 31 and 12, along with players coming off the bench with TJ McConnell, ended the game with 17 points, and Doug McDermott ended the game with 15 points. So overall, very, very dominant performance coming in from the Pacers. They took 100 shots as a team, and they made 65 of them, so 65%, obviously, and they shot 52% from three. Now, the Hawks, on the other hand, they did not shoot that well from the field, and you can see this is sort of why I don't have the Hawks making it really far in the playoffs, due to the fact that they lack the defense and they also have a relatively inconsistent offense. So, not really much that needs to be said about this game other than the fact that it was a blowout. I mean, Jesus Christ, 157 to 115 is absurd. But I digress. So, the Celtics, they matched up against the Wizards. The Celtics easily beat the Wizards, so don't really need to derive much from this game, except for one thing, and that is, Peyton Pritchard, I almost botched that name, ended with a career-high 38 points along with 12 assists, and he usually comes off the bench. So this is a player that's coming off the bench for the Boston Celtics, which really just shows how deep this roster is and how good of a team this is. Now, another player that shined was Svi Mikhailiuk. Again, forgive me if I botched that last name, but ended the game with 26 points. Sam Hauser ended the game with 16, and Neemias Quetta ended the game with 19. Now, none of the starters played in this game, and they were able to beat the Wizards, who also they did not have any starters in this game. But regardless, the fact that Picard was able to drop 38 points and 12 assists, 1 rebound shy of a triple-double, is astonishing. So, next game on this list is the Milwaukee Bucks losing to the Orlando Magic 88 to 113. Now, the Bucks, they didn't play Giannis, but they played Damian Lillard because Giannis, he was going to miss the last few games of the season due to his recent injury, his non-contact injury on the Bucks. And the Bucks, they did not play well against this Magic team whatsoever. So Middleton ended with 17 points. Bobby Portis also ended with 17 points along with 10 rebounds. Damian Lillard ended with 16 points, just 16 points. And he shot 2 of 14 from the field. And 12 of his points came from the free throw line. So that just shows how rough of a shooting night this was for Damian Lillard, and how rough it was for Middleton as well, who ended the game 6 of 15. Now, the Magic, on the other hand, Banchero ended the game with 26 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists, and Franz Wagner ended the game with 25 points, and they just played better as a team. But then again, when you have Damian Lillard shooting that badly from the field, it's like relatively easy to outplay the Bucks, especially when there's no Giannis in the picture. And that's basically like all the important matchups that ended up... The Suns, they ended up playing the Timberwolves, and the Suns ended up beating the Timberwolves 125 to 106. Now, I said in the previous segment that I have the Timberwolves winning in a 7-game series, and I said that in the hopes that Karl Anthony Towns was going to be on the roster. So in this matchup, it wasn't really fair because Karl Anthony Towns is still hurt and he's still not in the rotation. And Anthony Edwards did not have a relatively good game because he ended the game with only 13 points and was 3 of 7 from the field. Rudy Gobert ended the game with 21 points, 7 of 9 from the field. And the scoring was relatively spread out for this team, which is a good thing because they need that bench and that production to come back to combat against the Suns and their starting lineup. Bradley Beal ended the game with 36 points. Devin Booker ended with 23. Grayson Allen ended with 20. And Kevin Durant ended with 15. So that starting lineup alone is just it's almost a death sentence in terms of defense because it's like you have to guard every single one of those players on the starting roster or they could have a game like this. So it's very, very dangerous. This Phoenix Suns team is very dangerous, despite the fact that they're a relatively low seed, and they've arguably had a relatively disappointing season. It doesn't get talked about much because they're in Phoenix, but their season with Kevin Durant, with Devin Booker, and what they've had, it's really underwhelming. I will say, it's even more underwhelming than his time in Brooklyn. But regardless, those are like all the important matchups that happened from last night. And with that, we are out of time for this segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I bring up the MVP conversation yet again, because my opinions on who the MVP are have not changed. Unlike my defensive player of the year, where I previously thought it was Rudy Gobert, and now I think it should be Victor, my opinion has not changed in the slightest, despite the media changing its opinions as well. So I will be right back after this short break explaining why.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the MVP and exactly who I think is going to win the MVP, and particularly why my opinions have not changed despite the media's opinions changing as the season has progressed. And really, since the All-Star break, Luka Doncic, he's been on fire, and the Mavs have been winning a lot of these games. And because he's very popular, and the team is actually winning, and they're winning because of his ridiculous numbers, a lot of people are thinking that Luka Doncic is going to steal the MVP this time instead of Jokic, who I think is the MVP. I thought he was the MVP in the beginning of the season, and I'm standing by my opinion now. Jokic is by far the most valuable player in the NBA this season, and a lot of people, they sort of change their opinions just because of Luka's raw numbers and his box score numbers, because, I mean, averaging 38, 9, and 9 is very, very impressive. This is since All-Star break, by the way. So it makes sense why he's gaining that traction, as well as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who now the Oklahoma City Thunder, they are in that 1 seed, but is that really, like, I have said previously that, like, you know, the MVP is usually awarded to the best player on the best team. But does that mean that Shai is more valuable than Nikola Jokic? Now, just give me 1 second before I'm just pulling up these numbers real quick just to make sure that I'm not, that I remember them, because I had these previously in my head, but it's like, I want to make sure that I'm at least a little bit accurate. So, in terms of value, obviously we associate value with raw stats and overall wins. And that's usually like what the casual would look at. But most casuals, they wouldn't look at any sort of advanced analytics that determine a player's value to the team. And this is sort of why I'm here, to sort of like do that for you guys, because the revisionist history that Luka Doncic is carrying the Mavericks more than Jokic is carrying is absolutely ludicrous. Like, a lot of people, they think that, like, because Luka Doncic is averaging these raw numbers and the Mavs are winning solely because of him, which they are, that immediately puts him in the MVP conversation, which it does, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to win it, not just because the Denver Nuggets are a higher place than them, but because, like, they're comparing numbers. They're comparing Jokic's raw numbers to Luka Doncic's raw numbers, as well as the seeding. Like, I recently saw a post online saying that when Jokic won the MVP, he was the 6th seed, and these were his numbers. Now, Luka Doncic, in this season, as the 6th seed, his numbers are arguably better than Nikola Jokic's, but that doesn't necessarily determine value. So, the Nuggets, when Jokic is on the floor, the Nuggets are 18.9 points better with Jokic on the floor compared to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, to where the Thunder are 10 points better when he's on the floor, and compared to Luka Doncic, to where the Mavs are only 8 points better with Luka Doncic on the floor. So, 18.9 points better with Jokic on the court. If that doesn't determine value, I don't know what does. Because the number is right there. It's like they just play better when he's on the court. And I understand that they have other valuable assets to the team. Aaron Gordon, they have Jamal Murray, and they have a very competent bench, but they clearly wouldn't be anywhere near where they are right now if it wasn't for Jokic and his ridiculous production. I mean, 18.9 points better per possession with Jokic on the court compared to with Luka Doncic, where the Mavs are only 8.4 points better when he's on the court. Obviously, this is affected because, Kyrie is a relatively great scorer as well. So the fact that he has that other scoring option with him affects that number. But Jokic, he has Jamal Murray. And the number is just 10 points higher, even with Jamal Murray in the starting lineup. And Jamal Murray and Jokic, they're arguably the best duo in the NBA right now. A lot of people are going to say it's Luka and Kyrie Irving, but in reality, it's Jokic and Jamal Murray. They literally just came off of winning a championship, and they're back in the playoffs yet again with the same roster that they've had. So I really don't see how they're not considered the best duo in the NBA, probably because of marketing and things of that nature. Jamal Murray actually had a comment about that, where he obviously believes that him and Jokic are the best duo in the NBA, and the reason why they aren't getting that much traction is due to media coverage. But regardless, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, the gap between points per possession on off the court numbers that Jokic has compared to what Shai Gilgeous and Luka Doncic have, because it is staggering. And this could be seen not just on the offensive side, but also on the defensive side, which is something that a lot of people don't really attribute to Jokic or any of those players that I just mentioned, honestly. But regardless, looking at the defensive on and off numbers, it would seem that Jokic has much more of an impact defensively as well than either of those players do when they're on the court. Jokic's on-off numbers are minus 4.8. So what that means is essentially the team gives up at least 5 points when he's not on the court, and this is an average of games that this was taken into account. Now, Luka Doncic, on the other hand, he's minus 3.5, so that means the team does better. The Mavs do better defensively without Luka than the Nuggets do better defensively without Jokic. And looking at Shai's numbers, Shai's number on the defense is minus 0.1. So I believe that means that the team, it doesn't necessarily matter just how much better they are with with Shai on the floor. So with all of this in mind, I really don't see why Jokic isn't the MVP. I just can't see it, because 18.9 point difference when he's on the court, that is value. And the last time that I remember someone whose on-off numbers were a little bit lower than a runner-up was in 2011 when LeBron James when LeBron James was on Miami and with Derrick Rose. So a lot of people, Derrick Rose is a fan favorite, and a lot of people like him, and a lot of people get nostalgic about when he won his MVP. But in reality, I think that the only reason why he even won that MVP was because a lot of the media and a lot of the public was still upset at LeBron for joining Miami. But LeBron was still the best player in the NBA and still the best player on the court. But the revision, again, the media revised the history. So they made it seem like Derrick Rose was carrying the Bulls. And that is just absolutely ridiculous, because the Heat were 9.7 points better with LeBron James on the court compared to the Bulls, who were 2.2 points better per possession with Derrick Rose on the court. So if you're looking at value beyond the stats, that's the value that you need to look for, because, again, that is a very huge number. The fact that he is responsible for that much production coming in from that team is just astonishing to me. So that's basically what I wanted to cover in this. Oh, I totally forgot because I ran out of time. So I might as well go ahead and give a little recap of the rest of the season. And since I already talked about the awards, and it's so I think Jokic is going to win the MVP. And with this 65 game threshold, it really has robbed a lot of players from getting selected for all NBAs and all defensive teams. For example, Trae Young, he's not going to be able to participate in that. Karl Anthony Towns, Jimmy Butler, those players aren't going to be able to get many awards due to the fact that they weren't playing in many games. And I somewhat agree with that, and I really, really liked how this season turned out with the 65 game threshold, because we got to see a lot more action in the regular season between the best players. Unfortunately, we did not see Joel Embiid match up against Jokic in Denver. He's always scared of playing in Denver. I just don't understand why. But regardless, I really wish we got that matchup, but we ended up not getting that matchup. That was basically sort of the only thing that's I guess you could say that was I found a little disappointing for this for the season. But other than that, I really think that the season played out very well. Victor Wembanyama, he's panned out phenomenally. It was a slow start, and a lot of people in the summer, when the summer league was around, they didn't think that he was going to be all that. But he's quickly proven everyone wrong. He's going to win Rookie of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins it unanimously. And he's most likely, in my opinion, he should win the Defensive Player of the Year. But they might lean towards Rudy Gobert due to his impact with the Timberwolves. But again, as I mentioned previously, Victor literally stops fast break layups, just by standing there, because nobody wants to go up on him. And I have a feeling, and not only that, I just mentioned previously, you can watch my other podcast and the previous episodes and my overall opinions on Victor Wembanyama and the Defensive Player of the Year race. But I really I don't see Rudy Gobert winning it anymore. I just don't think he deserves to win it after watching Luka Doncic and this ridiculous season that he's had. The total number of blocks that he has and the amount of blocks he averages is just ridiculous to me. But other than Victor Wembanyama, there was a lot of there wasn't as much drama this season as I expected. Then again, Kyrie Irving didn't just randomly decide he wasn't going to play a bunch of games, so maybe that's why there was no drama. Because remember, Brooklyn Nets fan here, and I've had to deal with that Kyrie drama for the longest time, and there wasn't really that much of it. It was more so that it was more overall. Like, the drama was more overall, apart from, let's say, Draymond Green, where, like, he would say something that would offend someone else. He would do something that would offend someone else. But other than that, I think this season panned out very well, and I am looking forward to the playoffs and all the matchups that are going to happen there. And I'm going to be watching the Pacers versus Bucks the most, as well as the Los Angeles Lakers, because LeBron James, like, how could I not? But that's basically the end of this podcast and this segment. So with that, we are out of time for the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, and that is the end of the show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, Facebook for more content and updates. I like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized as well. The link is also displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. And that is basically it for this segment. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn.